revisiting keyboard export import. It's been a while since I wrote my tip on exporting and importing keyboard shortcuts. It's time for an update in this edition of Stuart's Audacity Tips. If you've been around SAT for a while, you know I always encourage you to share these tips with others. This is one of those that you've seen before, but not quite. As they often say in the IVR world, pay close attention as our menu may have changed. If you're new, then this is a first. We're all about sharing here, so go ahead, pass it on. Way back in SAT number 4, I first talked about the value of keyboard shortcuts in Audacity. Since then, there have been several columns about creating your own shortcuts for various purposes. One of my favorite tips regarding keyboard shortcuts is the ability to export and import them. As of 3.4.2, Audacity has changed the interface for keyboard settings a bit, so I wanted to go over it again just to help clear up any confusion that might be out there. The first and most noticeable change is that in Preferences, the section for keyboard shortcuts is no longer called Keyboard. Instead, it's called Shortcuts. This isn't a big change, except that if you're working from any of my previous tips about the keyboard, you won't find the keyboard section shown in those tips. Once you choose Shortcuts, the panel on the right will look familiar if you've ever used the keyboards options in previous versions of Audacity. In particular, you'll notice there are two buttons down at the bottom of the window. They are labeled Import and Export. They do exactly what you might expect: export your keyboard settings and import keyboard settings from a saved file. This is an excellent way to back up your keyboard settings so you don't lose them. Just use the Export button to save the settings to a file and store that file somewhere safe. If you ever have to install Audacity on a new machine, you can use the Import button to select that file and have your favorite keyboard settings just as you had them when you did the backup. Even better for you, the text file generated by export is very readable, and you can create small versions that only include a few keys. So here for your pleasure is a keyboard file that sets the Q and W keys to stop and set cursor and record, respectively. Just copy the text from here, it's down in the comments, paste it into Notepad, text editor, or Nano, depending on the platform, or your other text editor of choice if you have one, and save the file as SAT-keys.xml. Then go into Audacity and import that file from the Shortcuts panel in Preferences. Now your Q and W keys work the same way mine do. One other major difference between 3.4.2 and earlier versions of Audacity: if you've used the Export button to back up your keyboard shortcuts in a previous version, you'll notice that the file generated by that version is much smaller than the file generated by 3.4.2 and later. This is because there are many new options in Audacity that can be mapped to keyboard shortcuts. They all appear in the exported file, whether they've had a shortcut created or not. You can still import keyboard files you created from earlier versions into 3.4.2, and it won't bother any shortcuts that aren't included in the file. For example, the small file I gave you will only change the behavior of the Q and W keys. No other shortcuts will be affected. By the way, if you decide you don't like my settings, just import the file you exported previously. You'll be right back where you started before reading this tip. Hope this helps. I'm Stuart.